Hello everybody. Today, no donut for you. My name is Pavel,
And I'm Jason.
and today we are going to talk to you about wonderful communist utopia. So workers of the world, relax. You're not needed in this future, and enjoy. Hey guys, welcome to the program today. My name is Paul.
And I'm Jason.
And today we're going to talk to you guys about all kinds of crazy stuff that we've been doing some research on. We've kind of known about a lot of the stuff, but the more research we're doing, we're kind of seeing where this piece falls in with this piece and how they're all going together. Kind of wearing this goofy communist outfit today to kind of showcase something later on in the program, which I'm sure you'll see. So, Jason, where do we want to start today with this? We got a lot of crazy stuff to go over.
Just start in the beginning. Agenda 21, which I'm sure some of you are aware of. It's a non-binding UN resolution, but it's now called Agenda 2030. They've updated it, added to it. Once again, not conspiracy at all. This is information on their website. And basically how they want to transform the entire world. It basically lends credence to any of the New World Order conspiracy theory people. They just lay out the goal for that right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they pretty much do. Some people will have talked quite a bit about Agenda 21, and they'll say, "Oh, it's this, oh, it's that." And there's quite a bit of it floating around in conspiracy circles. But again, like you said, a lot of it's right there on their website saying, "This is what we're trying to do." I know officially all of it's non-binding. It's this, that, and the other. But once you start to look at everything as a whole, and then you start looking at some of the smaller pieces and plugging them into the puzzle, it's starting to look like, it's non-binding officially, but that's just on paper.
And a lot of it, if you look, it really ties into global warming. The Green New Deal type stuff seems to be directly inspired by this kind of stuff. And this has been out there for a long time. I became aware of it, I think, first in the mid-90s.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously they didn't achieve the goals they wanted to by the 21st century. So now they've extended it to 2030, which is just around the corner.
Exactly. Yeah, I once initially became aware of Agenda 21, probably late 90s, early 2000s myself. Mm-hmm. That's when I started, doing a lot more research, and, especially now with that, at that point with the internet kind of blossoming into what it has now become. That really has lent itself to being able to kind of go there. I know initially in the Agenda 21, the environmentalist movement, especially the global warming bit of it, that was not really pushed so heavily. It was there, but it was kind of a minor undertone.
Right. And now they're really using that, it seems to me, as a means of achieving their other goals.
Yeah, I would say so. There was somebody of note, I can't remember exactly who it is. I'll try to, after the show, I'll look it up and I'll put it down in the comments or down in the description or what have you of who exactly said it. But basically it was somebody saying something to the effect, and I am paraphrasing here, to the effect that it doesn't really matter if and how much, if any, of this global warming stuff is true. It matters that people buy into this ideology because it's what we need to further this.
Right.
So that is kind of what it is. I mean, I'm not saying that, there's not something known as man-made climate change, or that it does or does not exist to some degree. But to the degree that the alarmists obviously go off with it, it clearly isn't the case.
And I did print up some bullet points here, which we'll just go over very quickly, and that will give you guys a little bit of basis, because we're going to break this down a little bit and pontificate it on it a little bit. But just a few. Total eradication of gender inequality across the planet. As we see in this country, that's already been eradicated here, but yet it's an ideology they're pushing. It's not a reality.
Exactly.
Total eradication of hunger, which is pretty much already happened. Eradication of war, which the only way you're going to ever eradicate war is a one world government. Total eradication of malaria and other mosquito-borne diseases. That's a good thing. I don't think anybody can. There's a couple of these just talk about diseases. A set standard of education for every child on the planet. It can be very problematic. They learn what the UN wants them to learn. Clean water, sanitation, a decent job for every worker on the planet. Well, when the government goes around supplying jobs, thus the uniform you're wearing.
Duh.
Sustainable economic growth in every country. Well, then whose responsibility is it if a country's not doing well? I guess it's the countries that are doing well. Uh, Sustainable, it talks about agriculture, livestock, natural resources, um, obviously the global warming thing, greenhouse gases, floods and droughts. Uh, so that's basically, bottom line of what they're talking about. And a lot of that, like the mosquito thing, the disease thing, that's very innocuous. But
Hmm.
a lot of those other things, the results sound good, but how are you going to achieve those results?
Exactly. And well, let's just go down the first one. Let's start with the first
Sure.
one, gender inequality. So we know in the West, gender inequality is basically already met. There's,
Yes.
women can have access to pretty much everything. There's women in high positions in government across the United States and in Western Europe. So that's already an established thing. Now, globally, yeah, maybe there's a few places
Hmm.
where we could work on it a little bit. I mean, but I don't see anybody making this push so hard in Saudi Arabia.
Or in sub-Saharan Africa.
No.
Um,
So in places where there is actual true gender inequality, um, it's crickets. But in places where we have it, it's being harped on to the
hmm
point of incessant irritation,
hmm
like it is here in the West.
Which, and to me, it seems and they did mention racial equality too. I skipped over that one.
Hmm.
But those two kind of go in the same thing. It seems to me as a division tactic because there is no law in the United States that discriminates against anybody.
Yeah.
Everybody has equal rights in the United States. Yet, like you said, these are the places we hear those things the most, not in places where it could be used.
Exactly. And moreover, we not only do we have no laws in the United States that would support something like that, we have laws in the United States that are against it,
Hmm.
saying, hey, look, if you do this, you're in violation of the law.
Yeah.
So there's that. Let's go to the next point on the list.
Next point is the eradication of war.
Eradication of war, yeah. The only way you're doing that is global governments,
Yeah.
which is something that is being pushed towards.
Well, and it would also make it easy. You can't really call it war when it's a terrorist action.
Exactly.
So if there's one global government, you could have a group fighting another group, and nobody would ever call it war because it's simply two rebel groups fighting one another. They're terrorists. That's not really a war because governments aren't involved.
Exactly. Even if they are separatist groups that control areas of land and
Mm-hmm.
issue their own currency in the local
Mm-hmm.
area and everything else. Something that comes to mind like that would be Transnistria in Moldova, which part of the former Soviet Union. Transnistria is not recognized by anybody.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the few places in the world that still uses all the old Soviet symbols. Um, and they issue their own passports, their own currency, they have their own government, but they have their own flag, everything, own national anthem, own everything going on. You go to the edge of most of what you would consider Moldova, like proper Moldova. You cross over a border with checkpoints and guards and everything
Mm-hmm.
else. They have their own police, their own military, their own everything. But again, not recognized by any UN member
Mm-hmm.
state at all.
So if they were quote unquote at war with another country, it wouldn't be war. It would be a police action against separatist terrorists.
Exactly. So there's a good example of that.
So yeah, I think that would just be more of a redefinition of the term war rather than an actual eradication of human conflict.
Exactly, because human conflicts can exist pretty much throughout
Yeah.
the ages. We can try to mitigate it, but it's never going to be totally gone. What's the next point we got?
The next few points are basically disease eradication.
Yeah, disease eradication. And I know they want to do that with the mosquitoes. Again, that sounds fantastic. I hate mosquitoes. They suck. They bite and they itch and they're irritating. But I think eradicating mosquitoes is a really bad idea.
Well, every time we've tried to kudzu, every time we've tried to use nature against itself or eliminate certain parts of nature, it's never ended up well.
No.
They obviously fill a place in the natural order of things, and eliminating the disease itself is one thing, but eliminating mosquitoes altogether, which I've heard that idea is, I think that's problematic.
It's very problematic because there's a lot of species of birds and bats and various other things that rely on that. Fruit bats, I know they pollinate things. They don't necessarily eat the mosquitoes, but at the same time, you've got other bats that do. They drop the bat droppings. That's oftentimes used as fertilizer, especially in third world countries, because it's very rich in nitrates, which is good for the and very, very rich in nitrogen, which is good for the to grow plants. So you just killed off the bat population, and then you just killed off, I guess, the human population because now they're having difficulty growing their food.
Well, just the food chain as you're discussing just here in Tennessee. I don't know the name of the bug, but it's the one that looks like a large mosquito, but is not.
Hmm.
And the reason they look like a mosquito is because they prey upon mosquitoes, and
Hmm.
it's their sort of camouflage. So those species would die off, and who knows what feeds on those species, and so on and so forth. It could just cause a collapse in certain areas of
Well,
the food chain.
I know exactly what bug you're talking about. Frogs like to feed on those,
Hmm.
and then kill off frogs.
And I'm sure birds feed on them quite a bit.
Yeah, and then you kill off frogs. What happens then? Well,
Hmm.
what feeds on frogs? Well, obviously, especially on the tadpoles and the eggs, I know fish do.
Yeah.
So now you're killing off certain fish.
Hmm.
You kill off certain fish, you're killing off other fish inside the lake and in the rivers
A
and the
lot of
streams.
small predators eat frogs as well, like bobcats, coyotes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you're diminishing those populations as well. So at the end of the day, it's not good. Yeah, getting rid of malaria is a great, goal and aim. But at the end of the day, killing off all mosquitoes, as irritating and terrible as they are, and trust me, they are. I mean, I wouldn't mind lowering the numbers a little bit, but eradicating them entirely, not a good idea.
Hmm. Next thing on the list here, we've got a set standard of education for every child on the planet.
Yeah, I think every child should be able to go to school, learn how to
Hmm.
read and write and do math and basic history of the world perhaps and a little bit of science. That's great. You know, I think all kids by a certain point should probably know the periodic table of elements. A
Sure,
little bit of that kind of
and
stuff.
certain amount of mathematics
Yeah,
and what have you. The only problem with this is who sets the standard of the education.
exactly.
And when you have one governing body, I guess the UN would assume that they're setting the standard. So if they set the standard within 2 generations, they could be completely teaching falsehoods,
Exactly,
as
and
we've seen before.
that's something else we're starting to get into, especially in this wonderful internet age, which has been a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in the fact that at this moment still there is the freedom to speak out and
Hmm.
to have free exchange of information. This show is still technically not banned, even though it's brand new.
Yeah.
We're not banned. We're not censored. Completely. We are not necessarily uplifted on the thing. So please do share the video with your friends if you enjoy the program. But on the flip side of that, we are getting to a point where very shortly, all information is going to be controlled.
Hmm.
So what is said, what isn't said, what is out there, what's pushed down so far is not available. We're already seeing where 5 media companies in the United States basically control 99% of any kind of media that's on
Yeah.
television.
Yeah.
So
And that to me would be the problem with this: who controls the child's education? And and the only way we get new ideas is when people think differently than we do.
mhm.
Obviously, people in different countries have different schooling systems, different teaching methods, and then we come together and we share and we think about things differently.
Exactly.
But when you have a standard, everybody learns the same thing in the same manner. There's not really a difference of thought or idea. It's kind of just a meat grinder of education, just pushing out a homogenous product.
Exactly, and that's something when the Department of Education was founded in the United States, for example, it was supposed to be a clearinghouse of ideas. It was a small entity in which your representatives from different states would send in various things, say, hey, we're trying this program, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're various
Hmm.
different things, and they'd all push it together and they come back and see how it worked out for them, and they'd like, hey, this idea worked really great in Arizona, and this idea, which is totally different, worked really well in Kentucky.
Hmm.
And people could, across the country could look on the the Department of Education's website and say, oh, through their mailing letter or what have you, and say, because it was obviously founded a long time ago
Sure,
before the
sure.
internet, and say, hey, look, these are the different things that are working. I like what they're doing over here with this, and I like what they're doing over here in that state with this. Let's try some of those ideas here.
Hmm.
And it was a voluntary thing in which some states could look and see what was working and what wasn't working. Oh, Oregon's doing this, and that's not working, and we see what New Jersey's doing. Well, that's not working out so well for them. So we're going to try to avoid those things. And it was an idea to try to overall improve things by seeing what worked in good places. You'd say, okay, well, Kentucky was doing that. It was working really well for them. But Tennessee tried it and it had mixed results.
Hmm.
Yeah, so an example of
Yeah,
that.
because cultures and regions are different and people are different.
Exactly.
And it also brings up, your Soviet uniform there, the re-education camps, and we have to teach you what we want you to know.
Yeah, and that becomes the problem because, again, controlling the information, you get to
Hmm.
spin the narrative however you want. It's not uncommon for a news story to come out in 2 or 3 different places and have totally different headlines and totally different
Yeah.
takeaways from it.
Yeah, within the same newspaper.
Yeah, sometimes within the
The
same
Wall Street
company.
Journal will have different headlines.
Hmm.
All right, moving on. We've got let's see, clean water and sanitation for every person on the planet. Um, it's a great goal. I mean,
Yeah, that's fine.
nothing we can really say about that.
That's good.
A decent job for every worker on the planet.
Workers of the world, relax. We'll get later on into some of that, but we're actually going to be moving with some of the stuff in Agenda 21, especially what some of these, figureheads of this movement are actually about. Workers won't even be necessary. So
Yeah.
that's going to be kind of a moot point. Then now you're looking at UBI, Universal Basic
Right.
Income.
Well, and who's employing these workers? By the very fact of the UN writing this, they're assuming the government is going to be supplying these jobs, because if they're the ones giving the directive, they're the ones that have to execute the directive. So that's a very questionable thing for the UN to be participating in. It's a good goal for humanity,
Mm-hmm.
but how does an agency like that actually make that happen?
Yeah, the only thing that they could do is to give some sort of incentive, I suppose, if places began to have this
Mhm.
kind of notion of good employment and high employment issues or high employment rates and good paying jobs. How they go about doing that, I don't know. Maybe more votes in the UN. They have to incentivize it some way. But again, how much of that becomes top down versus bottom up? And you
Yeah.
want bottom up in this instance. You want the local governments, being the countries or states or what have you, making the decisions to create the jobs, and that moving up as opposed to a directive, telling this country make these jobs now.
Yeah, once again, with it's just like the education. Regions are different, people are different, customs and cultures are different. So that you'd have to account for that. You can't just, like you said, having the one overarching power giving these directives.
Yeah. So,
and that kind of leads into the sustainable economic growth in every country on the planet. Once again, how are you going to achieve that if you don't have control over those countries?
global government. It's
Yeah.
the only way.
Yeah. And what I really fear there is basically you're going to be taking away from productive countries to subsidize non-productive countries. And then with all this other talk in here, when the non-productive countries don't produce, they will find an ideological reason why they don't. They'll say, well, it's because you're racist against them. They were colonized at one point. Or any reason that it's an environmental reason. Well, they don't have the environment. They will find one of their leftist social reasons why so-and-so is not performing well, and they'll take from the others to boost them up. And that's the problem.
Pretty much. Pretty much.
Which de-incentivizes anybody from doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
When you can sit at home and, the guy going to work next door is paying your bills for you, you're going to sit at home. Unfortunately, the guy next door is going to figure that out eventually, too.
And he's going to sit at home, and eventually everybody's sitting at home.
Yeah.
But, again, maybe in this future, everybody can sit at home.
Yeah. And or maybe they'll just make work compulsory, and if you don't show up, you'll be arrested.
Perhaps.
Which is another thing that could, could go either way. Let's see. The next few are just kind of, global warming, sustainability talk, natural resources, reduction in greenhouse gases, flood and drought. I don't know how you can control floods. That's certain, with dams and measures, but I don't know how you can control droughts. That seems to be, to me, those kind of provisions in there just basically an extra level of control over the people. If we can say the environment's bad and we're causing it, then we can control people's actions.
Exactly, and that's kind of where they're moving towards a lot of this with global warming and what have you. Yes, that like I said, there's a possibility that some of those instances, some things are legit, and at the end of the day, we should probably, have tight controls on, scrubbers on top of coal power plants. You shouldn't just have open smokestack blowing crap out in the atmosphere. That's not good for anybody. Nobody's for that. Because at the end of the day, that's, regardless whether that affects temperature or not, and there's some studies that say it do and some say they don't, but nobody wants that crap.
Yeah.
Let's face it.
But I've always felt that putting that problem on the general populace who just goes and does what they have to do to survive and get by
Mm-hmm.
is a bit much.
Mm-hmm.
These it really opened my eyes when we I won't name the company, but Paul and I did. He worked with me in an installation company you had. And you remember how much trash we would generate doing those installations? It was
Oh,
insane.
yeah.
And I started thinking about that, and we were just a small
Mm-hmm.
little couple of guys, and we were generating so much paper trash, cardboard and plastic trash because of companies,
Mm-hmm.
and and that was just a tiny little thing. Imagine that scaled up times 100,
Yeah.
and then they want to point the finger at the American consumer, and say, "Stop consuming this. You're causing this problem." Well, it's on the shelf. It's for sale. It's a free country.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't. I don't like that attitude of blaming the average everyday American for these problems.
Exactly, because most of it doesn't lie with a lot of these companies, and a lot of these companies, which are oftentimes very leftist to begin with. So, yeah, starts to get interesting at that point.
Which is why I've found a lot of it to be just simply a control mechanism, because they really don't attack the problems where the problems truly lie. It's all just in the public eye, and and yes, there is some regulations and sometimes over regulations, but pointing and wagging the finger at the American public is not productive.
No, it's not. What else we got?
I think that's about it on the bullet points they've got here. This is just kind of a quick rundown, but I think that's about it on this.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll get back to you guys shortly.
Hi, I would like to take a minute to tell you a bit about Hero Song. Hero Song is a 501c3 non-for-profit organization set up to record the music of veterans, active duty, and first responders who also have musical ambitions. Music is great for the soul, and that's what makes us unique and ever so wonderful. Please check them out and consider giving them your support. Again, that's at herosong.org. Thanks.
Alrighty, guys, we're back from the break. So now that we've kind of given kind of a rundown of kind of what Agenda 21 was about, let's move into some of the other things that
Sure.
kind of relate to it. So obviously, Silicon Valley is also pushing a lot of this as far as when it comes to issues like information control. You see a lot of these companies starting to get on board with cooperating with the government. Obviously, everybody's pretty well aware of at this point of the large data mining facility that's in Utah that's connected with the U.S. government as far as where they're storing a lot of collected data on its citizens. Everybody's well aware, I believe, at this point of the social credit score system in China, which is being developed in somewhat with some cooperation and partnership with Google. We know how much everybody's talking about artificial intelligence in the media today. Everything's about AI. And we've also heard the term universal basic income tossed around. So let's kind of dive into this world that they imagine. I know I sent you a video. I know and an article as well, written by the same person. It was Ida Auken, who's a member of the the Parliament of Denmark, Danish Parliament. And she has written an article about 2030, and she's kind of laid out a pretty graphic and very descriptive world in which she envisions. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I read that article. You'd sent it over to me, and and I've already seen this attitude in millennials a lot, talking about no ownership. I thought it was strange in the article she mentioned once everything became free. This article was written as in a future imagined thing. It was written in the first person, and once everything became free, we no longer needed to own anything, which I thought was a ridiculous statement. If things are free, you can own anything. And it was just it was this whole, I guess it's kind of like Uber for everything is what she was describing. She said, why keep cooking utensils in the home when you just order them and they come to your door? And everybody shared everything. In the article, she was discussing her apartment and how it was used as a business office when she was away during the day. So that, that was kind of the idea of reusing and using everything, I guess, to be more efficient.
Exactly. Yeah, so it was the notion. I know she talked about in the video to an extent of why you own a car, because most of the time your car is just sitting there. It's better to just put out an order for a car, and your car shows up, picks you up, takes you where you need to
Mm-hmm.
go, and then drops you off, and you do your own thing. And then that car goes and does the same for somebody else. And same thing with anything. Whether she also used the example of a drill. It's like she's like, there's some guys out there that want to own a drill, but
Mm-hmm.
what do you want to drill for? Most people just want to drill or want the hole somewhere, or the hole in the wall, or whatever they're trying to do with the drill. It's like that's kind of not the point. And you brought this up that we were starting to see this a lot with millennials and the younger generations. Nobody really has a concept of ownership. I know even myself, I don't own a house at this point. I'm in my 30s. Now, some of that is the fact that I want to get the hell out of here. So, I don't necessarily want to be tied down for that reason. So there's a reason behind my very specific notion of that. But most people, they don't own a house. They don't own a car. They'll rent or lease or Uber. You're starting, especially in urban areas, nobody owns a car. And for that matter, even in an urban area, it's almost a hindrance to own a car because, and it's almost made that way in design. I mean, if you lived in downtown Nashville today, you probably wouldn't want a car.
No. But to me, it's the concept that, speaking to a lot of millennials, to them there is no distinction of being able to use something and owning something. Which is such an alien concept to me, because even though I'm just a few years out of their generation, baby boomers and Generation Xers, they don't understand, because there is a satisfaction to owning something, because you worked hard for that, and it's why do you own a car? That's also part of your individuality. I like this certain kind of car. Maybe I like this color. There's guys like to customize their car. Why do you own a drill? Well, maybe I like to choose the type of drill I like to use. I don't want to use the generic drill that I can get from the government supply house, so that's disturbing to me as well, because it once again, it's just a homogenization of everything. Everything's the same for everybody, which the Soviet Union.
Welcome to the Soviet Union, comrades.
We've already tried this before.
Yeah, and that's really all it's becoming is going to be a future feudalist communist state, really, in which everybody's a serf because nobody owns anything. And it's going to be communist. She also mentioned the fact that there could come a point where, with a lot of this, where workers don't even really have to work. It's going to be. I remember in another article it was talking about her article, where this is going to be an alleged communist utopia without the plight of the workers.
Yeah.
Because when you start factoring artificial intelligence and universal basic income and things like that, which are all being pushed as well, into this, the worker doesn't even have to work.
Yeah, which at the current level of population in this world, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah, and that's actually brings us to the next pinnacle of what they're trying to do here, which is population decline. They want populations to decline. Obviously, recently in New York, obviously now you can have an abortion, up to 30 seconds before the delivery anyway now, which is terrible. But they are also, especially in the West, now it's starting to become so ungodly expensive to have a family. If you have kids, it's very expensive. Way more so than it was, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
30 years ago, you had a kid. It's like, okay, a little bit more financial burden, but you're fine.
Right.
Not a big deal. Nowadays, totally different. Way more difficult, especially now the fact that it does oftentimes, unless you're living by yourself in a studio apartment, it's kind of expensive to make ends meet.
Yeah.
And if you have a family, it does take two incomes, and two incomes with small children doesn't work.
Right.
Because who's watching the kids? Well, then the babysitter is. Well, babysitter's going to cost
right, and
3/4 of somebody's salary.
Kids don't eat much. It's not the food that breaks you. It's kids' clothing is relatively cheap. It's the ancillaries, like you're talking about, the babysitting, the doctor's visits. That is what really costs people.
Yes.
And with having two income families, which is what you have to, it's almost a trap. You have to have a 2-income family to make it, but half of one person's income is going just to childcare. So it's, and when they pushed for the 2-income, when it was kind of get the women in the workforce, I think it was a thing the corporations just loved.
Oh yeah.
They said they doubled their workforce overnight.
And about, knocked the wages down considerably too.
Yes. Yeah. Which just makes it like you said, in the Western world, it's just damn near impossible to raise a family off one income.
Mhm.
Unless, of course, you have a nice job that only 5% of the population have.
Or the government takes care of you with
Yeah.
lots of benefits.
The creche, we have to have you just put the children in the government-run facility.
Mm.
They can be indoctrinated, and the parents can go work for the state.
That sounds like a communist utopia.
Yeah.
So there's obviously that. And obviously, they overall they want populations to decline.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's family. Having a family is very difficult. They're obviously abortion on demand, and in some places, more of a euthanasia for the elderly, and or just no more care,
Mhm.
especially when there is these universal health systems, which have some benefits. I'm not going to be totally against here. But at the end of the day, grandma doesn't need the $3 million surgery
Yeah.
because she's, 92 and
Yeah, they're simply
So,
going to, I mean, this already
off.
happens in places. Yeah. They're
Yeah.
simply just going to not give them the care
exactly.
because it's too expensive.
Exactly. So there's that. And then moreover, there's the total breakdown of the family unit in the West,
Mhm.
where we've seen kind of a war on traditional families, traditional life,
Mhm.
nuclear families, if you will.
Mhm.
Not saying that, because I understand, life is what it is. Some people get divorced. This happens, that happens. Life goes on. And not to necessarily demonize any individual person that's in one of those situations, because, again, life happens. But when over half the population's that way, that's not good as a societal issue.
Right, right. And on an individual level, we're not judging anybody. We're not, but like you said, on a societal issue, the fact that fatherhood has become
Obsolete.
which I'm going to blame feminists for some of that. Not all of it, because also some of the men are, they're falling into the modern debaucherous culture and just, anything goes, do whatever the hell you want. But there's also a pressure for a man to be what the modern ideal of, the leftist, what the new man is, which goes against many men's natural instincts, and they flee from it.
Exactly.
So that's a huge problem. But when we have, I think it's approaching 50% of children born outside of wedlock now in the country.
I think it's over that.
And it used to be even when I was in high school, 20 years ago, maybe right after high school, when somebody said I'm a single mother, it meant they were married 4 or 5 years at least. Sometimes in the case of my parents, 15, 16 years. Had a family, things didn't work out. They got a divorce, and then, they're raising their children on their own or what have you. Now it seems that single motherhood there was never a marriage to begin with. There was only a small relationship. Many of these, especially in the lower economic status places, many of these children are just simply born without even the mother being in a relationship. So it's very detrimental, especially to young boys that don't have a male role model to follow. And it's not going to turn out well for us.
Well, yeah, because not only that, but there's no male role model in the house, so there's that. That's out. They go into school at some point, so they have their mother. That's great. They go into school at some point, and then what do they have? They have 90% of the time they have a female teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have a female teacher, and pretty much anywhere else they go, female this, female that. No man or guy to speak of. No male role model.
Mm-hmm.
And all this pressure of men are bad, this, that, and the other, da 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 da. Toxic masculinity here. They're constantly hearing this rubbish from who? Who's saying that claiming toxic masculinity and this, that, and the other? And who's saying that usually?
Generally, the media, the mainstream media,
Media and
social media,
and
women.
That's what I was looking for. So surrounded by women all the time. Men are bad, and you're a man, or at least you will be. So yeah, where does this toxic masculinity partially stem from? I don't know. Maybe by the time they get to be like 17, 18 years old, they're getting sick and tired of being told that they're a piece of crap their entire life.
Yeah,
they're gonna act out like an imbecile.
Yeah,
and they've never had any positive male role model along the line to show them anything other than that.
I often liken this to what already kind of happened in the black community. Because what do you expect? It's the same thing that has already happened in the black community. And it's really opened my eyes and helped me understand what happened in the black community a lot more,
Mhm.
because they already went through this of not having fathers because of the welfare system and the state. I mean, they were just getting free money, and the fathers became obsolete, and the fathers started leaving. And the young men, they grew up hearing about how bad they were. The young black man, oh, a young black man's a criminal, he's a thug. Well, then they end up becoming a criminal. And we should learn from that and see how much of that negatively impacted that community,
Mhm.
and try to not, have it spread to the rest of America. But that's what's happening.
Yeah,
That's exactly what's
and
happening.
that's not to say that that's a catch-all 100% for the black community, but that has been something that's
No, I've
happened
just
more so.
noticed the influence of it,
Mhm.
and it's really a travesty what happened there, and it's starting to happen to the rest of America now as well.
Mhm. And again, like I said, it's not all of black society that is the black community that's that way. There are sections of it that are, though,
Right,
obviously,
right.
that you can see that from statistical averages, especially lower income inner
Well,
city.
and I think it's a little bit different. But when I was growing up, black men definitely did hear the message on TV and whatnot that, you know, like we were discussing, when they keep telling you that you're a bad person, you may end up becoming a bad person,
Mhm.
just because you're so angry. And that was a lot in the media in the 80s. I mean, you could definitely see that. But now you're seeing it pointing towards men in general.
Mhm.
And I think it's just a big crisis that's going to hit the whole country.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're seeing it not only in the country but globally.
Hmm.
So I mean, there's that. So we already have no family unit, breakdown of society with that, push of all these various things. Um, it's going to be a very interesting place in the future.
Hmm.
We're going to have, communism. It's going to be a mix of Ayn Rand with
Yeah.
the Green New Deal, um, Brave New World,
Hmm.
and little sprinkles of 1984 in the mix.
A little bit. It's mostly Brave New World. Ultimately, Huxley was right, but yeah, it's going to be, and we're already seeing it. Do whatever you want to do. No morals. Everything's permissible. As long as you don't step on the government's toes, you're golden. You can do anything. And I think these
Or any disenfranchised group.
right, right. But yeah, I mean, go do whatever. Who cares? And they found out that they can control people way better that way than the Soviet style boot on the neck, because people will eventually rebel against that. But whenever they're allowed to just have the hedonism that they have, it's bread and circuses. That's all they care about.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we're seeing a lot of. Speaking of bread, moving in that direction. So we already have a handful of companies controlling the media. We have information control starting to take place on the internet. Back to the bread aspect, we already have a handful of companies controlling a lot of the food production
Yeah.
in the world. Monsanto comes to mind, who is now called. Didn't they merge with Bayer or
I
something?
believe they did merge with Bayer, and it's Bayer Agriculture now, or something, some such
something
nonsense.
Something to sound nicer than
Yes.
Monsanto. Yeah.
Yes.
So there's that.
Well, yeah. Who do you think is going to be consulting with the UN to maintain sustainable agriculture? It's not your local farmer. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah.
All the hippies that think that's the way it's going to go, that is not the way it's going to go.
No. It's gonna be those highly modified GMO tomatoes that taste like crap.
Mm-hmm.
That's what everyone's gonna be eating, as opposed
Yep.
to those heirloom tomatoes that actually taste good.
Yep.
So get ready. So with all these things moving into this really bizarre future, we know we already touched on the fact that the kids these days really don't want to own anything, and there's also another big push, which is to start to centralize people into urban areas and get them out of rural and suburban communities.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've seen a couple of maps online as far as development plans for the United States, where there are various sectors of population densities
Mm-hmm.
and large swaths of unopened or natural land, if you will. And there's also where the government is starting to go in and purchase up a lot of the said land. That's in a lot of the country. And if you look at a map, actually, of where land is privately held versus publicly held, and you can see in almost large entire sections of states that are
Yes.
publicly owned, that are not privately owned.
Yeah. Yeah, the Tennessee has large places that are owned by the Forestry Service that are not national parks or state parks. Now, a lot of times there are towns in those places, and there are people that own homes and plots of land within that.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, yeah, it's like Daniel Boone National Forest.
Mm-hmm.
It's the whole eastern side of Kentucky and Tennessee.
Yeah, pretty much. So public land.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we'll start to get to a point where I don't think by 2030 that we're going to have total abolishment of private property. That's not going to happen. That's too much to do.
Oh yeah, that's it's 11 years away.
That's a pretty tall order. No, but what you will see is a reduction of private property as far as like land that is available for purchase, thusly driving the market up to it to an insane degree.
Yeah, where only wealthy people can afford it. And we're already seeing that as far as, I'm an outdoors guy. I would like to get some recreation land, but it's getting to where the rural lifestyle is a wealthy lifestyle.
Exactly.
Whereas when I was a child in the 80s, it was a poor lifestyle. People would farm, and my grandmother had cows and pigs and a garden and whatnot. And now, though, if you want to live in those remote areas and enjoy nature like that, you have to be somewhat wealthy. And that's already happening. And once again, we have a generation that they don't want to do that anyway. They don't care. And the whole problem with not having ownership is if you don't have ownership, what's really the incentive to take care of anything? You just abuse everything you have. If you just call for your car to show up on the street, well, you don't really care what happens to it because you call the next car next time.
Well, I think at least what the Danish politician Ida Auken was talking about is, well, if you get the car with a rideshare and you trash the car, then a bad review is left for you. So maybe you'll have difficulty getting your car next time.
Yeah, but I think it would break down where everybody's doing it, and if everybody's doing it, there's just, everybody has a bad review. Because we've seen stuff like that in cities like with like the subways in New York being trashed. Nobody really cares because nobody really owns it.
But on the flip side, there are places where the subways are actually pristine.
Yeah.
So, people, no individual owns that subway either, though.
Yeah. I'm just saying it's human nature to not really. And that's why companies, when you go to work, they talk about buying in and ownership of your job. That's why they talk about it, because it's a different mindset, than just renting your life, and owning your life.
But again, we're seeing a big push of this in urban areas. And oddly enough, you mentioned that rural lifestyles are becoming very expensive, but even living in the current urban landscape at the moment is very expensive as well. So it's just going to get expensive any way you slice it.
That's it. Yeah, that's true. And the problem with not having ownership as well is if you don't own it, you don't control it. And I think that's the scariest part of it.
Yeah.
Is it can be taken away from you because it's not yours. And the people who take it away from you can say, well, you never paid for it. You don't own it. It's not yours. All the cars are shut down. You cannot travel anymore. No more government approved travel.
Yeah.
It would be very easy for them to do that.
Yeah. And speaking of which, that was actually another thing that was mentioned, is the fact that at some point they want to do away with the internal combustion engine altogether, where it'll be only so many new cars are available. And then after that, okay, no more new cars are available. And why would somebody want to do that? At the end of the day, they're pushing high-speed rail, they're pushing this, that, and the other, autonomous vehicles within cities. But it's all about control, because if you have a vehicle, this is something that's very American, but if you have a vehicle, you have the freedom to move about on your own, on your own accord. You don't have to wait for a bus, a train. Nobody can shut those down. I guess they could shut down the roads, but at a certain point, depending on what kind of vehicle you have, you could go off-road. You don't care.
Yeah, and you can be across the country in 24, 25 hours. Just one day you can be 1,000 miles away. So that does give you very much autonomy.
And that's something that I think is slowly trying to be taken away in addition to. So anyways, now that we've explained this brand new, wonderful communist rehashing utopia that's about to happen, we're going to have some more fun things. We're going to think about why would anybody want to do this a little bit after the break. We'll see you then. Hey guys, hope you're enjoying the content. If you are, make sure to press that like and subscribe button right down there. And if there's any material and stuff you would like to see us cover, we're more than happy to do that for you as well. Hope to have some new content coming out for our Patreon subscribers. Those of you that are, in the mood to do that. We also have one of those. Should be pretty easy to find us, the Donut Hole Show. And, yeah.
Yeah, and once we get some more subscribers, we'll probably start a merch store, do some mugs, some hats, things like that. We're just now starting out. Hopefully, this episode got our audio quality fixed, and continue to move forward for you guys, and offer more and more every week.
Yep. So, thanks again, guys.
So we're back from the break. So with all this craziness going on, global governance, ultimate control over the population, some of these things just don't make sense from a sustainability standpoint. They want economic growth that's going to continue on for, sustainably. But at the same time, they want to decrease the population.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you expanded a company out across the globe, or even a government company, a state-owned enterprise, across the globe, at a certain point, you're going to cap out because the population's going down. And yeah, you've expanded into new markets, but there's going to be a point where you can't really continue growth. It's going to be a plateau. It's going to flatten out.
Yeah.
So one would have to question what the incentive at the end of the day is for this. Obviously, control is great, but that can't be it all. That can't be all of it. So one has to then question other things. And this is why we got the hats on. And this is all speculative at this point moving forward. Everything else prior is documented fact. This is where we're getting into crazy town. This is why we got
just pure wild speculation.
Yeah, craziness. That's why we got the tinfoil hats on. Kind of a visual for you guys of the fact.
And to keep the ray beams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we note that in the early 1900s, technology was moving along. We had some decent industrialization. Things were kind of going pretty well. And then in 1945, all of a sudden, we discovered something really cool. And it went boom. And very shortly after that, technology, especially information technology, excelled by leaps and bounds.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1991, the Soviet Union fell, and there was something known as the KGB Blue Files, and that went into some really interesting things, talking about extraterrestrials and UFOs and what have you, and basically kind of just laid it all out there for the world to see, because it all became declassified. I think, and again, speculative, pontificating here, just total crazy town. But there is a possibility that maybe there are aliens out there that maybe our government or various governments in the world, large players, large powers, have had covert meetings with, on small scales of some sort. And they have basically said, look, our technology is way better than yours and what have you. And we have, we have no problem contacting you about this stuff and helping you out, but we can't deal with a fractured place. Your planet is fractured. You have all these little governments, all these various things going on. We can't deal with that. It's against intergalactic federation laws or whatever they want to call it. We can't deal with you officially yet. So here's a little bit of something to get you started. Get back with us when you have all this figured out and you guys are one unified place that we can deal with.
Yeah, and a good analogy to that would be like us going into Afghanistan and trying to make sure they keep their country formed as a whole rather than dealing with each separate tribe.
Mm-hmm.
Because you just simply can't.
Exactly. Which is, exactly something the United States has been dealing with ever since we went to Afghanistan after the 9/11 attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Because we got this tribe in control of this province and this area, this tribe is controlled by that area, and the central government controls Kabul and 60 kilometers outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about it. So with all the various fractured factions, they can't really deal with everybody.
Right.
So it's just easier to say, we were going to deal with this one entity and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it moving forward. So that, I think, is going to be the only reason that any of this would make any sense whatsoever.
Right. Right.
What are your thoughts?
And there are several motivations that the ETs could, quote unquote, could have for this. One is that they're benevolent and they just think, hey, you guys have got to get your stuff together, and then we're going to help you out and try to make it a better place. There's also the idea of that they have to follow their own version of the UN, and say their own little galactic version of the UN says, well, you can't really deal with separate tribes. You've got to deal with the whole planet.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also the third option is that they're completely malevolent and they're trying to use our own internal structures to weaken the citizenry and weaken each other enough so that they can do whatever they want. So pretty much it's one of those three options to me. Like I said, wild speculation, but it could be any one of those. I tend to fall in the middle. Donut hole is usually about falling in the middle, and is that it's probably, if any of this were to be true whatsoever, I think it would be more of a galactic UN type. This is, hey, we don't deal with individual tribes. We only deal with planets.
And the fact that obviously contact has been made would be the same way that, unofficially governments have contact with each other sometimes too.
Sure.
So it's like, hey, we came here. We're not really supposed to be here, but, here's a little bit of something to get you on the road, but you need to get this stuff squared away. Yeah,
there's back channels, which, I mean, is a common thing. The U.S. government has back channels to every government in the world. Because, even in North Korea, I'm sure there's back channels.
Oh, there are.
Yeah.
I know if an American goes to North Korea on on vacation or what have you, on holiday, the Swiss embassy actually works as our de facto.
Okay, yeah.
So,
but I totally agree with you and it just does not seem to be. The motivation is obviously not money. They can get our money right now. They don't have to move us into city centers. I mean, a dollar is taxed every time it changes hands already. I mean, they can get all of our money they want. They'll slow walk us into it like they always have, and they can take all our money. So I know money's not the motivation, and generally with people that have a ton of money, and I'm talking billionaires, their next motivation becomes power. Well, ultimately, those people have pretty much as much power as they want already anyway. They can still control people. They can buy and sell. I mean, some of these guys are so rich, they can buy and sell small nations. So, like you said, you have to think, what is the real motivation beyond that?
Yeah, because nothing else makes sense. This is the only thing that I have come up with so far that is even plausible.
The only other plausible thing is if it were this gets into secret societies and whatnot, is that if it were a group, say a secret society, I mean, I know there's rumors of many different ones.
Illuminati, Freemasons, etc.
Yeah, Skull and Bones. I mean, there's so many. Pick your poison there. But if there was one that was saying, hey, we don't have enough of the power, we want to consolidate that power to just us. And that would also make a little bit of sense.
That would make a little bit of sense as well, but a lot of those quote-unquote secret societies are already in making all this happen anyway.
Right.
So, what's the point?
Yeah, but from what I understand, that's people that have that mindset. Power is very intoxicating. Maybe they look at a first world country and they say, "Hey, our secret society doesn't control that country. We need to control it all." Which you've seen that throughout human civilization, that people think they need to control everything and everyone.
Yeah,
that are power mad. I mean, if Hitler or Stalin were left to their own devices, they'd be ruling the entire world. If they could achieve it, they would have.
Yeah. So, I don't know, a little stuff for you guys to think about, I suppose. And if you want us to kind of delve into this episode, leave a couple of comments in the comment section. We might come back and revisit some of this stuff in the future and kind of really take a nice deep dive for you guys. Anything else you want to add to this, Jason?
No, nothing else. I think we've covered it.
All right, great. Well, thank you guys for joining us. And again, make sure to press like and subscribe and share with your friends. And from our studios here in Nashville, have a good one.
Have a good night.